Open fire. Now that I have your attention.
Welcome to the Chiss Ascendancy podcast.
Yoda, it is I, Qui-Gon Jinn.
Master Kenobi, in your solitude on Tatooine, training I have for you. An old friend has learned the path to immortality. One who has returned from the netherworld of the Force, your old master, Qui-Gon. How to commune with him, I will teach you. My ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the Force around you. Here, between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chiss Ascendancy podcast. This is Josiah, and we're on the road, and so I brought all this ridiculous equipment with me, and we decided we're already on the road doing some stuff for work, and why not pick up a podcast, record something on the way. So this is episode 77. I know that we've done Book of Boba Fett stuff, 30 Days of Boba Fett, reviewing things, reacting to things, and we want to get back on the regular schedule. Chance was asking me, what's the difference between everything you're doing in an episode? And I told him, I don't know. But this is going to be 77. I guess eventually I want to keep calling them episodes so I can claim to having 100 episodes. Technically I have over 100. We have 100 things, whatever you want to call them, snippets, whatever. But we want to get to 100 official episodes. And I guess episodes can be all over the place. But of course we've got Obi-Wan Kenobi coming in May. And you've seen the trailer, Chance?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Loved it.
And so we were kind of talking about what we wanted to see. Funnily enough, we talked about a bunch of things except for we didn't talk about the trailer itself.
That's true.
But it was making me think, what do I want to watch, listen to, all of those things, getting ready for Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so Chance has just finished season 5?
Season 5 of Clone Wars.
And so
I'm getting there.
You got 2 more to go,
And
the
Kenobi,
2 best ones.
Kenobi gets better and better, right?
Right.
At the end of 5, he's like the guy. Well, I won't give any spoilers, even though I'm like the last one on Earth watching the show.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the end of episode 5, or season 5, Obi-Wan is the one person that's really standing with the people, with our friends, right? And hey, you know, and just really shows,
right,
he's the guy. I mean, he's awesome.
Yeah. As you watch the Clone Wars, it feels like you love Obi-Wan and Plo Koon more and more.
Dude.
And you're more and more okay with Mace Windu getting thrown out the window in Revenge of the Sith.
The further I get into Clone Wars, the more I wish I was the one doing the throwing of Mace Windu.
So we're talking about all this, and it made me start thinking. So Chance was like, yeah, he was like, I just finished season 5 of Clone Wars. I took a little side trip and did some Resistance, and me and a couple of our friends were like, that's cute, no more Resistance. You have to make it to Rebels before you get to Obi-Wan. Just because obviously with the trailer you've got the Inquisitors, you got all these other things going on. So I was thinking yesterday, what were some other things that I wanted to refresh, watching, listening to, reading, whatever, comics, books, all that thing, and just preparing for what might be in the show. And one thing I was really thinking about was in 2017, I believe it was, they released the From a Certain Point of View for A New Hope. And so for those of you who are either new to the channel or new to Star Wars, new to reading Star Wars, expanding beyond just the movies and the TV shows, if you're a reader and you don't know where to start, some of these From a Certain Point of View books are such a great option because it's short stories. So sometimes you commit to a whole book and you're like, I'm going to finish it for the principle, but I'm really not enjoying myself right now.
I just listened to, I don't normally do audiobooks.
Right.
But per your recommendation, I listened to High Republic, Light of the Jedi.
So good.
Loved it. But a 15-hour audiobook was a huge commitment for me.
Right.
And it took me probably 3 months
to get all the way through
it. And so these short stories are...
They're
awesome.
perfect.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And so if there's a character that you're like, I want to know more about this person from A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back, and I assume next year we're going to get Return of the Jedi, I was thinking about some of these really fun short stories. And so episode 77 of the Chiss Ascendancy, we're focusing on the oneness of the cosmic force, and specifically how it pertains to Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. So while we're on this road trip today, picking up this drum set for the church I work at, we decided, let's listen to this short story, digest it, think on it, and then talk about it. And that's what we're doing right now. So the short story is called Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. And this is not the novel. So she wrote the short story, Master and Apprentice, focused on Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But this is during A New Hope. And then if you go way back previous to The Phantom Menace, episode 1, there's actually a full-length novel by Claudia Gray featuring Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan called Master and Apprentice.
Which I'm very excited to listen to. And it was your brother Samuel, who's normally on the show.
Yeah.
Bought me the audiobook on that. And it's looks like another 15-hour. Maybe that one's 10.
It's like 12 probably.
Yeah. So it'll take me a while to get to it, but I'm excited.
It's a commitment, but it's a good commitment.
I was excited about it after listening to this short story.
Yeah.
It makes me more excited because you really see a lot of the relational dynamic between the two.
Right.
In a way that I guess we're diving right in.
Go for it.
In Clone Wars really helps flesh out the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Right.
In a way that you don't get in the movies as much because the movies have so much ground to cover.
I feel like in the movies, what's interesting about Obi-Wan and Anakin is in episode 1, Obi-Wan calls him a pathetic life form. In reference to Jar Jar and picking up another pathetic life form on Tatooine, agrees to train the boy, not because of a love for Anakin, but because of an allegiance to Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
Which is something that the short story actually touches on.
That's my life in ministry. Like,
right?
Okay, fine, I'll train the boy.
Wow, coming
Just
from
kidding.
someone who was under your tutelage, that hurts my feelings. But it goes from episode 1 where he's like putting up with Anakin for the sake of Qui-Gon. Yeah. Episode 2 is just a constant ragging on Anakin. I love how in episode 2, Obi-Wan keeps calling him my young Padawan, my young apprentice. Yeah. Like, he'll be like, nice shot, idiot. It's just so funny. And I've made that same joke on air before, but episode 3, you really start to see the relationship that forms a brotherhood as Anakin has been elevated tonight.
Yeah. But you don't really get that between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon.
Right.
Because you don't see that dynamic in episode 1 because there's so much of the story that's headed elsewhere.
And they're separate for so much of it.
And when you show up in the movie, that relationship's already been established. They've already done things, and so this was cool to start seeing some of that because Qui-Gon's one of the best Jedi ever. Yeah. And of course, Obi-Wan's one of the best ever. So to see that dynamic is really cool.
Well, it's interesting because in episode 1, most of the interactions you get between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are the little teachable quips that you would get in passing in a book. Like Obi-Wan saying, well, Yoda said I should be mindful of the future. And Qui-Gon says, not at the expense of the moment. Anyways, we're doing such and such.
Right.
Well, you shouldn't, don't resist the will of the council, Qui-Gon. And Qui-Gon's like, look, I have to do what's right,
Right.
So those are moments that would be highlights in a relationship that's in a novel long story, but you get not that they're harsh, but you get the more serious moments without the feel of how strong a relationship is, especially between a master and apprentice.
And I think that felt like that feel is like when you look at the original trilogy, right? You don't ever really truly get that feel. Luke seems very upset when Obi-Wan dies.
Right.
Spoiler alert! If you've
never watched
40-something
years.
Yeah. But when Obi-Wan dies, Luke's very upset for losing somebody he just met, and it's probably because Obi-Wan is essentially his only connection to who he is as a person,
Right.
and his last name and all that stuff. But you never really see that relationship or dynamic between the Master and Apprentice. You see it more on the dark side with the Emperor and Vader.
Yeah.
And then in the prequels, you kind of get a glimpse of it at the beginning, but then you see it again on the dark side,
Right.
with Maul coming in and
Well, it's interesting because obviously you see lots of Master and Apprentice, quote unquote, time between Obi-Wan and Anakin, but you could argue that the most doting of relationships between a leader and someone being led is Palpatine trying to seduce Anakin. The most care and affection
Right.
that's shown.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's not a real love, but that's the most Anakin feels affection from a leader toward him, it feels like.
And that's really the emotional connection through the Clone Wars is Anakin with Snips.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you see that dynamic. You still see the Obi-Wan and Anakin connection. You still see some of that in other characters.
Mm-hmm.
You see that in Luminar and Barriss and things of that nature. But it's just cool for these two legendary Jedis,
Right.
Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, to start to get to see some of that fleshed out a bit, to start to see some of that dynamic between them.
And so where we start this story is if you've seen A New Hope, which if you're watching this, you've seen it, right? We're going to just assume.
You have to. Right?
So when Ben and Luke are talking and they decide, well, let's figure out what's going on, and they come across these Jawas that have been killed. And it's interesting because it's made to look like the Tuskens did the dirty work.
Right.
And I've been saying all along how great and awesome I think the Tuskens are, and now we're just now getting the fruits of my labor. That we're finally getting a fleshing out of the Tusken culture. These poor guys have been framed for daggum everything.
Yeah. What's funny is that they're such great warriors that we see in Book of Boba.
Right.
But then in that moment, Obi-Wan's like, no, these are far too accurate for
Ironically,
for troopers.
these skilled warriors who've been surviving in the desert couldn't have done this. The stormtroopers are more precise.
Who are like, in pop culture, we make fun of for their shooting.
Like, you see the memes where it's like stormtrooper firing range, and it's just pieces of paper that haven't been touched at all by a gun.
Yeah.
But in this moment, you have that moment that Samuel always makes fun of where Luke goes, oh, if they're tracking us, that will lead them back. And Samuel always goes, home, because Luke's, running off to go find Aunt and Uncle Crispy Biscuits.
Oh.
And I'll still buy that action figure, Hasbro. I'm so addicted.
If they make a crispy one,
I would buy a burnt biscuit Baru.
Dude, you should just buy them and put them in the oven. Like on a cookie sheet.
Dude, it'd be funny if
make one.
what if
a custom figure?
Baru and Owen are arguing, and Owen's like, what really burns my biscuits? And then you just hear when they're just being incinerated.
It's them.
You know what really burns my biscuits? The Empire.
Oh my god.
Wheel. So anyways, but there's that moment where Luke jumps in the land speeder because he's so concerned for the well-being of basically his adoptive parents. He calls them Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, but this is the only family he's ever known.
It's his family.
I really think in Obi-Wan Kenobi we're going to get such an appreciation for Owen and Beru. I think we're going to see some of the bullcrap they go through.
Luke has a stronger emotional response to Obi-Wan dying a little while later.
Yeah.
Than he does in that moment. I don't know if that maybe shock.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you point that out. I think that in the moment, like when, I don't know if, not that this was George's intent, but when they're writing and filming, Owen kind of gets the short end of the stick because he looks like a total jerk.
Yeah.
But it turns out, like, if you think about it, if it came out in 77, it's been 45 years since Star Wars came out. So if you look at it in the grand scheme of that, you look at it, and 45 years later, you're thinking, well, of course Owen doesn't want Ben around, and we're going to see some of why in this show. But back to the original point, this moment that happens in Master and Apprentice is where Obi-Wan is there at the Sandcrawler with the dead Jawas, and we've seen it before where by the time Luke comes back from the homestead seeing that his uncle and aunt have been, assassinated, you see the droids putting the Jawas' bodies on the, the burn pile and things like that. And so in that moment between Luke realizing he has to go check on Owen and Beru, and by the time he gets back, that's the little niche that the short story is written into,
Right.
which is so cool because I don't know why I thought this, but in my mind, every time I picture the Force Ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn, he's got to be in Obi-Wan's hut. I don't know if it's just me thinking when it's so bright outside you can't see your phone. It's like,
You can't see a
you
Force
can't see a
Ghost
Force Ghost
in
on
the middle of
Tatooine.
the-
It's too
in
bright.
the middle of the afternoon.
So, but it's interesting. That's when Qui-Gon shows up.
Yeah.
So my toy photographer brain is trying to figure out a way to have a Force Ghost Qui-Gon with a Sandcrawler and
Right.
Obi-Wan there and stuff.
Bright suns.
But there's this moment where it talks about the way the story opens. You really, if you're reading it, you need to reread the first couple of paragraphs over to really get a feel for it, because Claudia Gray does such a masterful job of writing the Force and the feel of the Force and those things, that it's so detailed that I know we're trying to, I don't know about you, but when I'm reading, I'm like, okay, I just need to get into this story.
Yeah.
But it's so good right at the beginning. You know, if you're listening to it, or if you're reading it, take your time, because it's talking about the vastness of life that exists within the Force, specifically the cosmic Force, which is the greater blanket of things, if you
Right.
will. You
And
know,
I think knowing going into, like, setting up the setting like you just did, right?
Right.
This is the moment that's happening. This is where they are. This is what's going to happen. I think that really helps you, because you walk in, because every time you start like a random, audio Star Wars story,
Right.
it could be in, there's so many planets and so many places. And
yeah,
who
knowing the
knows?
setting.
So kind of getting a grasp of, okay, we're right outside of a sandcrawler. This is what's going on. This is the
Right.
setting. And if you know that, then I think from the moment you push play,
Right.
you start to get the imagery.
Yeah. And so it's talking about, it talks about under the sand there are beetles and bugs making traps for one another, trying to survive in the harshness of the desert.
Apparently four-arm, like...
Those are the bugs we're talking
whatever
about.
the heck that thing
The
was.
Book of
Yeah.
Boba
Yeah.
animal. That's so funny.
The four-arm guy from Mortal Kombat is also under the sand.
That's so funny. But it's interesting because it's talking about just the life, like it talks about the desert is never lifeless. Like you look out, and it's kind of interesting because it's a I don't know what to call it. In the church world, we call it a type or a shadow of like the Old Testament, the New Testament.
Yeah.
But it's a parable, a microcosm, of, it's an analogy. Geez, it took me 7 years to come up with that word. It's been a long day. It's an analogy. It's a parallel of what life looks like in seasons when you're still within the living Force, meaning you're still limited in your understanding.
Yeah.
That the desert is never lifeless. The Force still wants to use you. The Force is still active and vibrant and alive, even in the sands of Tatooine that look so
And it
empty and barren.
It speaks to how unattentive that we are to what is around us.
Right.
And that's what they're constantly, the Jedi are like, pay attention to what's around you. Notice, feel the Force around you. Like, in fact, that's one of the first things we hear from Qui-Gon is, hey, feel the Force around you.
Feel, don't think. Yeah.
And so it's just like, but it's so easy for us to get, if we're in that desert, we're lost in, I've got sand on my feet.
It sucks.
This sucks. It's hot. I'm miserable. But for like,
I don't have any water. I'm out of my last black melon.
This is terrible. Yeah. And
which that thing looks like it tastes disgusting.
He said it was an acquired taste, and there's most of the things I've seen in the Star Wars food department look terrible.
Yeah.
So if that's acquired in that world, it can't be good.
Well, it's the fact that you pop it open and dust comes out, and that's supposed to quench your thirst. It's like, just drink this dust. Don't worry. Open up your vacuum cleaner after you've hit the rug in your dog room and drink that, and it will sustain you.
It's acquired. It's acquired.
Ugh. Anyways, so it talks about the bugs laying sand traps for each other under the surface. It talks about the lizards and the serpents that are just barely under the surface, that are teeming with life. And it talks about it's really interesting. It makes it sound like it's almost painful for Qui-Gon to leave the cosmic Force
Yeah, like there's some effort
to separate from it. And he says, but it's tolerable because he knows that soon he'll be one again.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that it talks about he starts to remember. So basically, when you become a part of the cosmic force, I think in my mind how it works is you turn blue and you're just everywhere the same as you were before.
Right.
But it's like your whole it's really more like
it's like
the Thanos snap, where it's like your
dissolved
whole, you become a part of everything.
Even the atoms you form are now no longer together.
It's like, which is so crazy because the Bible says dust to dust. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's interesting is like in this moment, it's like I've always pictured maybe the Force sending them, like when the first time Obi-Wan appeared to Luke, when Yoda appears.
Yeah, did the Force send Ben?
Because the Force is will is that, so the Force is sending them their presence for a moment of encouragement or whatever it is. But it seems like from this story that it was an act of Obi-Wan's will out of that relationship, or not Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon's will out of that relationship with Obi-Wan. He put effort into learning to do that so that he could still be present there.
It's crazy because I remember years ago when I was still in Bible school, I was following Star Wars accounts already on Instagram before it was cool.
Yeah.
And they put a question out there, and there's a picture of Obi-Wan and Vader fighting, and it says, when Obi-Wan says, if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. What does that mean? And my answer was, because he becomes a part of the cosmic force, his wisdom and his understanding of the universe and his ability to teach Luke actually becomes limitless because he's not tied to a physical form.
Right.
And what's interesting is, I guess I always saw it almost like the Stranger Things upside down, where it's like, it's the spirit world of our world, but you're just the same person, but you're blue. You know what I mean? Like there's not really you never don't become yourself. But this story explains it as the opposite.
Yeah, it's
you're
like
a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, it's not like Sixth Sense where you're walking around.
Yeah,
some people can see you and some
it's not the
people
Haunted
can't.
Mansion.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think that maybe my mind has always treated it more like that.
It's
more
imagine
like
the whole world
yeah.
is water. And when we're alive and we're part of the living force, we can't be a part of that giant unit.
Yeah.
And when you cross over into the cosmic force, everything of you becomes water or sand or whatever, or air. You know what I mean?
Very Stellan Geo's point of reference.
Yeah, thank
to
you
the
very
Force.
much.
That was very...
But it was interesting. Speaking of that, it was so interesting that it talks about the harmony of the song of the cosmic force coming from Claudia Gray, who's one of the writers of the High Republic.
Sure.
Where the people like Stellan, is it Stellan or is it Elzar? I think Elzar feels.
It is Elzar.
Elzar's the one that feels the force is like water.
Yeah.
And you can call upon it. It can be powerful.
You can go dive into the depths.
Exactly. It can be still. It can be chaotic. And then Avar Chris feels it like a song. It was so cool to see those snippets from 5 years ago.
As somebody that I grew up watching Star Wars movies, I was just old enough to not get into the cartoons, not knowing that there was substance to them. Now,
right.
Which is why now I'm going back.
Right.
I grew up on the Ewok movies, which one day I hope we can do an episode on.
Absolutely.
And so,
especially now that we can watch it on Disney Plus.
I'm telling you, man, I love them. And so, but now that I'm like getting into the comics and now I've started down this road of the audiobooks, what I'm finding is that, these authors really unpack a level of the Jedi and what they could do, especially in the High Republic era. Mm-hmm. You see, I remember telling my wife after listening to Light of the Jedi, I was like, dude, the Jedi in the High Republic era were so much stronger.
Yeah.
And it really made me better understand when Yoda's like, we have lost our connection to the Force. I never understood that they were all using the Force. They were all still
what we got to see in the prequels was such a
a
step up from what the original trilogy showed us.
Yeah, because the original trilogy,
you don't really get much.
The Force is mostly it's something you move things around with.
Yeah.
That you connect to, and then in the prequels you start kind of getting a little bit. There's a little more to it. Mm-hmm. Then you look at what's going on in the High Republic era, which I'm still convinced, years down the road we're going to start seeing that on film, right? And
there's already rumor of that.
Yeah, what they can do is so big. It's so much more.
It was funny because in Light of the Jedi, I guess if you haven't read Light of the Jedi, fast forward 40 seconds. Okay, I'm going to say a spoiler. 3, 2, 1. Okay, in Light of the Jedi, Samuel texted me. He's like, "Where are you at?" Which I always know something good's coming because he wants to know, can I say it yet? You know. And I said, I'm at this place, and he says, a Jedi. He loves Loden Greatstorm. Loden just did something I always wondered why the Jedi never did it. And so there's these guys who are bad guys. Long story short, I don't want to. I'm on a 40-second timer.
Exactly
I put myself on.
saying, yeah.
But Loden reaches out and finds the people who have ill intent based on their emotions within the Force, who are trying to kill people, and he raises them all like 15 meters in the air and just drops them.
Yeah.
And nobody in the prequels was thinking to do stuff like that.
No.
You know what I mean?
No, I mean, we got to remember that when, even in the original trilogy, like, it was a really radical idea to do something like Star Wars.
Right,
like,
right.
We're way down the road on, if you were to show, like, more modern movies, like, even like Rise of Skywalker, you show that to somebody back in, like, the 50s, they would have been like, it would have been overwhelming. But we've conditioned ourselves to deeper levels of entertainment. I mean, now our Marvel movies are like, now we're not even in the same, universe anymore.
Right,
like, we're jumping all over, right? And
well, it's funny because, like, when they started, off topic, but whenever they started making cars using production line, and the Ford started doing the production line, it was funny because they were like, they think this is a good thing. It's not a good thing. We have scientific proof that shows the human body can't travel at over 70 miles an hour. Like, things, and we're like,
we're currently doing 80.
Yeah, it's just so funny. Like, and same thing for like what you can see in Star Wars. There were massive positive reviews. Yeah. But even back in the 70s, there were the persons like, it's just an entertainment. There's nothing to it.
And there's still people that, obviously, people love to pick it apart today. Everybody's a critic and all that. But I love that, there's levels, there's layers that are being unpacked now that if you grew up and you just saw the original trilogy, what the Force is so much smaller. And then when you watch the prequels, you go, okay, it's bigger. And even if you watch the newer trilogy, you see a little bit like bigger, but it's really when you start diving into Clone Wars and into some of this High Republic stuff, you go, man, like it's pretty big what the High Republic
It's so
does.
interesting too, because just like your relationship to other people, or if you're religious, your relationship to God, it's when you first get into it, you're not really sure what it is, and it seems so complicated. But with the Force, it's very similar to those other areas where it's like, yes, it is bigger than you ever imagined, but that's also what makes it so, like, the Force desires to be at peace. The Force desires justice and all these other things. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, so in the original trilogy, it was like the Force is small and it's only attainable to a few.
Right.
And then the prequel trilogy kind of makes it feel a little bit more attainable because you see so many more Jedi versus you just have Obi-Wan, Luke, Vader, those folks.
Yeah.
But then by the High Republic, it's like, no, the Force is around and in everything. And I know Yoda says that, but it's like, yes, it's in the tree, but can this human being touch the Force?
And I think that the way that Claudia expresses that, even in just the first couple of minutes.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten past the opening scene.
When she's setting it up, she does a great job of doing it.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And so Qui-Gon here's what's so cool. And this reminded me of, as a married person, you're always talking to your spouse about, are people going to be married in heaven? Or like worried about stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was funny, I heard a guy say one time, this guy was preaching, and he talked about how his mom had passed away, and since his mom had passed away, his dad had remarried, and he said, he was like, it's funny because I always hear people asking, and he goes, all I know is that if we recognize people in heaven, which I think we do, when we get to heaven, I know my mama, and she's going to say, Paul, who's this young woman? His new wife.
Yeah.
And he said, and I know my dad. He's going to say, never seen her before in my life. But it's so interesting because it's funny how Star Wars has so much like depth to it and real life to it. As I'm listening to this short story, I'm realizing maybe I won't care if I know anybody because that's not going to be the first thing on my mind.
Yeah, there's definitely the fan base being so big for so long has afforded them, like, the fan base has continually said, no, we want more.
Yeah.
We want more. We want more. We want more shows. We want more locations. We want more comics. We want more books.
Right.
And because Disney's doing such a good job of like pulling things and telling one story,
Yeah.
it's not as confusing. That's kind of been my beef with Marvel. Is I grew up more of a Marvel guy, and but the stories are everywhere. They're possible to connect. And while I know a lot of people don't like that Disney came in and said this is Legends and this is not, it really brought a lot of clarity to it.
Right.
And now they have this ability to really to flesh out some of those deeper details.
Right. And what's really interesting is talking about, finding a handful of really great authors that they trust.
Yeah.
So you have Claudia, who's like the Song of the Force. What was this and this? And then you have Cavan Scott, who writes Charles Soule, who writes the first High Republic book, which focuses more on Avar than the next two do.
Right.
And the way she feels and understands the Force, for her personally, is it's like a song.
Yeah.
And when someone's in distress, where Elzar Mann might feel a wave start to ripple and cause distress in the perfect ocean that is the Force, she feels that like something's off. There's an off note, there's an off key. So it's cool that she starts to kind of weave that web. Who knows if she's already thinking about this story 5 years ago.
Right.
But anyways, all that to say, that's the first like 3 paragraphs.
But there's a lot more to it.
Qui-Gon hears the voice of who he used to be, or the name of who he used to be, because he's now part of the oneness of the cosmic force. Right. And he hears someone called to him, and it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he hears his name, and he says he begins the journey and the process of leaving the oneness of the cosmic force to commune with his apprentice. And it says he feels skin to wraps onto bone, and hair and muscle are all a part of that, and then his robes. And it says, and if it's almost like it feels like it's been forever, but it feels like it just happened. He takes his hood down like he just did it yesterday, and he speaks his apprentice's name and starts to commune with Obi-Wan. And
it makes me wonder if like there's a similarity in Obi-Wan, or Qui-Gon, who is one with the Force, still has to peel himself into that moment.
Right.
And it makes me think about when Luke Force projects himself across the galaxy to this other, in The Last Jedi.
Right.
And why that took such a toll on him.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's some similarities in that. If he was doing it in a similar way as what Qui-Gon was expressing. Right. Or if it's different.
I think
just a visual projection.
I think it's different in a sense that I don't imagine that Luke, I could be wrong, but in the same way that he can't be touched, I don't think he can touch.
Right.
Because he's tied to the living Force still. He's tied to his body.
Gotcha.
But I think that, for instance, like when Yoda corrects Luke in The Last Jedi, and he's like, you have to learn from your failure. It's the greatest teacher. Don't just hide yourself away. Don't repeat my mistake, basically.
Right.
You see that he sets that tree on fire that has all the sacred text in it and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that shows the power of, through the Wills, teaching Qui-Gon, teaching Obi-Wan, teaching Yoda, this knowledge is getting passed on. You are witnessing the power of when someone is one with the cosmic force. It's not just Yoda's connection to the Force. He's a part of the entire Force in and of itself, and he peeled himself away for a split second to commune with Luke.
Gotcha.
So I always wonder about that, though, because Kylo can't touch Luke. Can Luke touch Kylo? And my hope, whenever, way back whenever we were talking about what do we want to see in Rise of Skywalker, what are our hopes, you know me, speculation is my favorite part of the game.
Sure.
And my hope is Luke Skywalker, the Luke Skywalker I grew up reading in Legends, who's like a bad mamma jamma.
Right.
Is he the first person to, because Yoda crosses into the physical plane and is able to bring that lightning down to strike the tree. Do we see Luke be the first person to move from the cosmic into the living Force and like fight? Or, you see what I'm saying?
Right, yeah, sure.
Like, almost like almost to the point that he wouldn't even have the glow about him.
Right.
Like, I really hoped,
Right.
and I know this is really far-fetched, and I know that, especially if you want to do stories after Episode 9, not that they're going to be episodic movies, but if you want to do anything post-Episode 9, you can't really give Luke this kind of power. At least it doesn't feel like you can. But I was really hoping that he would almost lose the glow, because it's up to him whether he's in the cosmic or the living force.
Right. I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I see what you're
But he goes over and he's talking to Obi-Wan.
Delaware?
Yeah. He's talking to Obi-Wan, and he's telling him about Obi-Wan's very distraught. And he's saying the boy's going to see. And I guess Obi-Wan puts two and I don't know if he has a knowing or if he just puts two and two together.
Right.
That Owen and Beru are going to be gone.
Yeah.
And he's saying he's in danger.
He senses it.
Yeah, maybe he senses it.
Yeah, he knows what's going on.
And he's saying Luke is in danger. Like, this boy that I've spent these last 20 years, I'm finally...
Which now we're seeing that he was watching over him.
Right. And it's interesting because he's saying, I finally feel like, almost like my new self. Like, I almost, these 20 years, and it's finally coming to fruition, all the hard work and the exile and the loss of love that I've been going through for these 20 years. And they said, it's described as like his Jedi robes are so tattered and worn that you would just think he was the hermit he was pretending to be.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that Qui-Gon is like, Luke has so much more left to give to the galaxy. His story is very far from over.
Right, because it really
Trust
talks
in the
about,
Force.
One of the things that it really talked about was in that moment when you are connected fully to the Force, they seem to not be as bound to a linear sense of time by the way that Claudia was describing it.
Yeah, he talks about like...
it's kind of stepping out from that.
Yeah, Obi-Wan was saying he's so young, he's in danger. And it said... He wanted to reassure Obi-Wan by saying, don't worry, his time's not up, basically. He's going to be okay. But he also... There's a moment he's thinking to himself, time in the living realm is such a blip on the radar that like, what is young, what is old, but his time's not over, so don't worry.
Yeah.
And it's interesting though, because there is a moment where Obi-Wan is worried for his pupil, you know, because Obi-Wan in this moment doesn't know what awaits him at the Death Star.
Right.
You know, so he's worried, and he's saying the work is just beginning. The work is just starting. Like, I've been here for 20 years, and I'm finally this new person. The work is just getting started.
Yeah.
And Qui-Gon basically is like, you have to continue to trust.
Right.
For 20 years, the hardest part, and you mentioned it when we were talking about it before we started recording, was it was so interesting that he was saying, you've done great things as a Jedi, as an apprentice, and as a master, but one of your greatest accomplishments has been the fact that you've lasted these 20 years out here disassociated from the Jedi you grew up with.
Yeah.
Lost the four main people that you ever loved were Padme, Satine, Qui-Gon, and Anakin, and three of them died before your eyes, and the fourth one suffered a fate worse than death, and you're still here. The greatest accomplishment is the one you just completed, where you were 20 years staying faithful.
You did all this time reflecting, all this time thinking about things, all this time waiting.
Right.
And in the middle of all that, never, falling to the dark side, never falling into, think about what fear or bitterness or, which would be the one that seems like it would get you in that moment.
And it makes me wonder, I wonder if the self-hate that Obi-Wan's feeling, right? Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, but the fear of losing the war, the fear of what's going on between, because he clearly, by the end of episode 3, we pretty much know, he has a pretty great idea what's going on between Anakin and Padme.
For sure.
But he doesn't want to rock the boat. He doesn't want to hurt his two friends. Right. What does he do? It's
so interesting because his response is so opposite of Maul. When Maul, at the end in Phantom Menace, goes into his place, right? And Maul talks about all the time that he spent loathing, hating Obi-Wan.
And it's what kept him alive.
His time of waiting was filled with so much hatred and darkness. And Obi-Wan's is the exact opposite. His time of waiting
ironically, is hope.
Is hope.
Which is what the trailer said. In the middle of darkness, in the middle of despair, hope is there.
Yeah.
And so, one thing
mental fortitude there.
Yeah.
That's
there's
impressive.
there's the Maul.
Especially because I would be thinking about all those times Palpatine was playing with us.
Yeah.
I would spend all of that time thinking about how not only did Anakin go to the dark side and the weight of that, but like Palpatine puppeted me to leading a war.
Right.
And the whole time he was like that.
He's both sides.
Dude, the level of bitterness and anger and resentment I would have felt towards Palpatine, I'd have ended up becoming more like Maul.
Yeah.
And ended up becoming just filled with
It's
that.
so interesting because when you look at it like Maul keeping himself alive for all these years, like making like this crazy robotic body to keep himself alive, building essentially a underground empire before everything kind of is dissolved during all that time when he's just back and forth. You think like, wow, what a strong individual to hold himself together. But ultimately, he was just being led and fed by his emotions. And Obi-Wan is the opposite, where we think he's just in a hidey hole. But really, to be in one place, and your job is to watch over the son of the guy you failed.
Yeah, and didn't Obi-Wan specifically said in episode 1 that he never really wanted to go back to Tatooine again.
Don't want to go back to Tatooine.
And now he's not only is he on a remote planet, but he's living in secret for a long time after all of this just all this chaos and just going from world to world to world, and just the energy of that.
Yeah.
And when I come off of the energy of an event, and if I'm at that event for a long time, like we go to camp.
Right.
When I come back from that, I'm wiped.
Right.
But I also have created a habit of high energy lifestyle.
Right.
It's a hard transition to calm back down.
Right.
And I can't imagine doing all the things that he did, living in the world of the Republic.
It's not just dial it back and you rest. No. It's dial it back, but stay constantly aware.
You don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting because
if I were Obi-Wan, I would have found a way to go kill Palpatine. I would have become Maul. I would have spent the rest of my life trying to kill Palpatine.
Well, it's so interesting because the cosmic force is so we were talking about the High Republic and the way seekers that maybe feel things a little bit differently, and they trust the idea of what the Jedi want to do, but they need to go find what the Force has for them by themselves. And we were saying the rigidness of the Jedi Order that pushed Ahsoka away, that pushed Barriss away, that pushed, for a lot of times pushed Qui-Gon away. He was kind of on the outskirts.
And Anakin.
Pushed Anakin away. And all this time...
But you know who never was a jerk? Plo Koon. Anyways, keep going.
But it's so interesting that the cosmic force, it's kind of cool because within the cosmic force, yes, there are hard times, but it's kind of like you can see the end from the beginning and we're going to get to an okay place.
Yeah.
But I think it's so... I'm really interested to see, what is that moment for Obi-Wan during the show that's going to bring him to a place where he's worried for Luke in this story, but at the same time he really has healed from a lot, and he's actually encouraging. Qui-Gon says, I'm sorry I failed you for calling you to train Anakin. I'm sorry I failed you for pulling you way too far into the future that you weren't ready for yet. Maybe I shouldn't have even brought Anakin. And Qui-Gon, the longer he's talking to Obi-Wan, the more he feels more like his human self and starts to have those human regrets again. And there's a moment where Obi-Wan actually is the one that has the clarity of the Force.
He says, no,
and he says, Anakin made his own decisions. And I'm responsible and you're responsible, but ultimately he makes the decision.
What I like about this moment is that she does a good job of painting that this is not the first time Qui-Gon has appeared to Obi-Wan.
Right.
And that's great because we've already got confirmation that we're going to see Qui-Gon in the Kenobi series. So this is
there's rumor. I don't think there's been confirmation.
Oh, I thought it was confirmed. That,
it's all speculation still.
Liam Neeson was in.
I've heard that. I've heard people say there's a good chance, but I've never had any.
Maybe my hopes just made it like it was
happening.
It was happening.
But it's I guess to kind of wrap it up. It's so cool, and one thing that we noticed right away, because we're listening with the intent of how does this story bring us closer to who Obi-Wan's going to be that we're going to see, or how does this story show us who Obi-Wan will be at the end of the show?
Right.
Is the show going to bring us to this who's mature and he's worried for Luke, but
I mean, surely we've got to see him process.
He's made a lot of peace, it seems like, where he in the trailer he's like, we lost.
Yeah, I think though that the Obi-Wan that you see at the end of episode 3 and who you get at the beginning of 4, the emotional, like, that's a desert's a great word for that, right? The emotional desert he had to walk through to be at that level of peace.
And at the same time, when you look at the cosmic force, it's an emotional desert, but there's always life. Like, there's always hope. There's always, like, it's kind of like with the Tuskens from Boba Fett. It's like this planet used to be filled with water. Yeah. And it made me wonder, like, I was really hoping, like, maybe they're going to find water, like something really grand or something. But one of the things that was so cool was it says, and I don't know if this is on purpose, I don't know how far out these stories are being made. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we've heard that every show gets an overhaul. Every movie gets an overhaul. But it was interesting that it said it took 10 years, because Yoda says Qui-Gon's been learning how to commune through the Force. But it took 10 years for his wisdom and understanding and having, I guess, the willpower, because it says it's painful to separate himself into this physical form. I don't know if painful is the right word, but like it's a process, and there's like it's laborious.
There's an intentionality to it.
And but the one thing that we were like, really, was it says from the moment that they begin to commune, because it's not that he can't hear him or speak to him, but from the moment they begin to commune, it had taken Qui-Gon 10 years to get to this physical plane. Right. And I looked at you and I paused it and I was like, Obi-Wan Kenobi is set 10 years after Revenge of the Sith.
I'm telling you, I think
so. Yeah. I think we're going to see it.
I do too, and I think that
the shirt's coming off.
Dude, I'm going to be fired up.
So
what's cool though is how many people like Obi-Wan. It didn't take him long at all. It took him like 5 minutes.
Right.
Like, he got, not even that. It was like he became one with the Force. Run, Anakin! Like he was already there.
Yeah, he has that moment where he's already communicating to Luke.
Maybe Qui-Gon had already taught him how along the way.
I
doubt we see that, but I'm.
Yeah. I think, like, I think we won't see Vader as much as we probably want to see Vader, and I don't think we'll see Qui-Gon as much as we want to.
No.
I think it would be really cool if.
Somehow Grogu will show up and save the day.
Heck no. We need a break from Grogu to get excited for Mando.
I know.
But I'll say this and then we'll close. But how I hope it ends is I really want the show to go to a dark place. Mm. Like Boba Fett, there's not a lot, like Mandalorian, like there's risk, but there's never like an emotionally dark place. Yeah. Like we all know he's going to get Grogu back. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's complications. But there's not an emotional darkness. Boba was going there with the Tuskens, and then we just moved on from it. Yeah. I thought they really should have played that out, which is, I'm not the director, but I hope we get to a really dark, even like double down on the defeat he feels. Am I even going to be able to save this kid? Is it hopeless? They're going to find me no matter where I am, because we know from the trailer they're on Tatooine.
I just hope when they finish fleshing it out that it feels like there was purpose to it.
Right. So that's what I was going to say, was I hope that there's a deepness of like, is there ever going to be hope? Yeah. Right? Because that's the point of the trailers. It's despair, but there will be hope. And I hope, LOL, is that maybe I don't care if it's a small little cameo, there's the despair and we've barely survived the Inquisitors. Are more going to show up? Right. Is the Emperor going to show up? Can I even save him? Qui-Gon's not talking to me. Something like that. And I would love for like maybe the finisher of the finale. Obviously, I want as much Qui-Gon as I can possibly get. For sure. But I think the most rich way that they can do it is in the depths of his despair. Like the closing scene is Obi-Wan. And he looks up and there's Qui-Gon. And it's like there is hope. Right. And then that's how the show ends.
That's awesome.
But anyways, we want to dive into the deepness of the cosmic force and like I don't know. It's crazy, like
Yeah,
how
there's so much more that you could do.
Yeah. So we could go on forever,
Yeah.
but we hope you guys have liked this. If you did, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, send good luck our way. I put in my application to be on the podcast stage at Celebration in Anaheim. Who knows? I mean, there's literally a zillion Star Wars podcasts out there that are just putting out stuff. But we put our hat in the ring.
Yeah.
We sent some informative stuff. We sent some in-depth lore, and we sent some funny things. Hopefully, it's a good mix. And so, early April is when they said they're going to announce who's going to make it. And so, if we make it or not, I guess we'll let you guys know. But that's been episode 77, the oneness of the cosmic force. And we hope you dug it, and that you continue to dig the show. And thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.